Well, welcome back, everybody. I'm here once again with Ernst Wilhelm, and we're going to be continuing on from our previous discussion. Or last video we did, last lecture was on Einamshas, why there are so many Einamshas, how they're calculated, and giving you a little more insights into choosing Einamsha a little more intelligently. And today we're going to be talking about Nakshatras, the specific emphasis on what exactly are Nakshatras and how does that lead to our understanding about where to find Nakshatras within the sky. So thanks for coming back, Ernst.
Sure. Nakshatras are one of the most intriguing parts of Vedic astrology. There's a magical quality to their very symbolism. Unfortunately, they're not so well defined. And we see that in the fact that there's first so many Einamshas that we can calculate our Nakshatras for. And there's not a lot of information on even how to use Nakshatras with astrology. The roots of the using Nakshatras really goes back to the Brahmanical tradition of the Brahmins having a knowledge of these deities. And simply through their deep understanding of these deities, they would make use of the Nakshatras. The key to the Nakshatras is understanding the deities. However, these days, there's no source for a lot of this information on these deities. You know, it's like you can look up some of these deities and try to find any useful, interesting information, and you don't get a lot of mythological stories. You might just be able to find one sentence on them, you know? So in some ways, we're very, very limited in what we can do with Nakshatras compared to, I think, what they used to do as far as adding color to the chart. So I think it's something that we need to put a lot of energy into. Fortunately, there's some astrologers who just have a love for Nakshatras, are naturally drawn to them. And I see these astrologers draw a lot of good stuff out of them. Michael Reed is one of these Nakshatra nuts. Eve Mendoza, she's one of these Nakshatra magicians. And there's a few other ones out there. But they're doing it, a lot of what they're doing is intuitively starting to understand these energies because there's just not a lot to study out there, which is a real shame. And there's a few people in India. Gosh, one person just contacted me. Since I haven't really met him yet, I don't recall his name, but I'll be talking on his channel soon, who's a real Nakshatra scholar as well. So there's these people, and I do expect to get for a lot more good Nakshatra literature to come out. As of now, there's really no what I would call great or profound Nakshatra literature out there. The best available thing I think that's come out in the last 100 years, is David Frawley translated the Shaktis and the deities of the Nakshatras from the Tetra Brahmanya. I really recommend everyone find that. You can find it on his website. So just search for, that stuff and you'll find it. And that's the key to really understanding the Nakshatras. But we have a lot of work to do with Nakshatras, not only in understanding how we can really use them, but even in the simple calculation of the Nakshatras. What we have to remember is that occult sciences deal with the occult. They don't deal with the physical realm. Okay? They deal with the occult. And the occult is a mathematical science. Okay? Now, it's a science that can be intuited, but it's also a science of perfect mathematics. Chakras used to say, if it's not logical, it's not true. The problem is, we don't often have the level of logic necessary to see that truth, okay? And that's why as humans, we're constantly developing our logic side by side with their intuition. So a good astrologer is someone who's logical, but also intuitive. And one day, we may be so logical, we can do astrology without intuition. But that we're not there now, right? So with Nakshatras, this is especially true in that we don't have, a lot of the logic of the Nakshatras is missing and skewed. But we have to remember, if it's an occult truth, it's logical, it's mathematically defined. If we can't define it mathematically, it's not true. It's not logical. Okay. So with Nakshatras, what does that mean? Well, Nakshatras are division of the stellar circle of some circle, okay,
Right.
into 27 parts. So when we take a 360-degree circle and divide it by 27, we get 13 degrees in 20 minutes, right? Okay, that's the occult mathematical truth. A nakshatra is a 1/27th division of the circle, which is 13 degrees in 20 minutes. But now we get into the poetry of it all, or the myth of it all, and we say that star is this nakshatra, and that star is this nakshatra, and that star is this nakshatra. And the stars, there are stars up there, some are brighter, some are less bright, and those stars will point to us approximately where a nakshatra is. And so we can look up and we can say, look, the moon is by that star. The moon is in this nakshatra with a little experience.
So the stars are just reference points.
They're reference points. And the key to understand is they're crude reference points. The nakshatras have nothing to do with the stars. How do we know that? Because when we divide the zodiac or the circle of 360 degrees into 27 parts of 13 degrees and 20 minutes each, it's impossible to make all the stars named after the nakshatras fall into the right nakshatra.
Right.
You can get some of them to fall in, but you can't get all of them. No matter what ayanamsha you use, no matter what period of time you calculate them for,
right, it
is impossible to get all 27 stars to fall into the nakshatras they're named after at the same time. The reason is, but in the old books, they make it sound like they can. Because in the old books, they're calculating the stars so sloppily, only within 4 degrees of accuracy.
Right.
But they can say this star is in this nakshatra, but if you calculate where the star really is, it's not really there. Their astronomical calculations from when we have these books, which is between 100 and 700 AD, are very shabby. We don't have astrological tables and calculations from when Krishna walked the earth, from when Yudhishthira was around, from when Parashara was telling people what to do, right? We don't have those. The astrological calculations we have are from 100 to 700 AD in the old books, and they're all wrong. They're all incorrect. One of the saddest things that's happened in recent tradition in astrology is a rebirth of people using Surya Siddhanta calculations to calculate planets instead of using real astronomy. And now they're calculating their planets to only within 3 degrees of accuracy. And the fun thing is, it won't be that all of them will be off by 3 degrees in one direction. One will be 3 degrees this way, one planet will be 2 degrees that way, another one will be 30 seconds this way. It's just this random mash of planets. And there's intelligent astrologers advocating the use of these incorrect calculations. They used to use these in a lot of parts of India in the 1800s. Yukteswar used to travel around and tell people, don't be stupid, use real calculations. These calculations are outdated. These calculations worked in 1100, in the 1100s. But since then, they're not accurate anymore.
Right.
And it used to be that every century, some astronomical genius would correct the calculations and create what they call bijas, or seed corrections, to the current corrections to make them accurate for now. That hasn't been done in 1,000 years. And so now these people are using these old calculations, they're not even working anymore. And they think they're doing a more divine astrology.
And this is specific to the nakshatras or just the zodiac and planets?
They're doing it for everything.
Okay.
Again, it's not mathematically correct anymore, therefore it's no longer an occult science. So the point I want to stress, I kind of got off a tangent there to alert people to not using these calculations that some people are pushing these days. But the main point I wanted to make is that the nakshatra stars don't fall into the nakshatras.
Right.
The nakshatra stars are named after the nakshatras as reference points.
Reference points,
not
right.
as the heart of the nakshatra.
Right.
It's the very same way with the zodiac. We take the zodiac and we divide the circle into 30 parts. Into 12 parts of 30 degrees.
30 degrees, right.
And each of those parts is a zodiac sign.
Right.
And there's nothing in those zodiac signs that make them what they are, except that they're the first, second, third, fourth, 30-degree part.
Right.
It's the fact Libra is what it is because it's the 7th of the 12th parts.
Mm-hmm.
Not because there's an actual scale there.
But the point that you made with the nakshatras was that the stars themselves are points of reference to say, when I see that star, I know it's falling in that field of space of the nakshatra. But that is also applicable to the constellations, because zodiac is said to be 30 equal degree, or each sign is 30 equal degrees. And when we look at, for example, this kind of chart, we can see that
it's not like that.
It's small.
It doesn't add up.
Virgo is huge, and we can even go and see how many degrees are each of them, and they don't make 30 degrees. So anyway,
they don't make 30 degrees.
Yeah.
And with the nakshatras, each nakshatra has a single star in it.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, a nakshatra is considered to be a constellation, a small constellation. And there's a primary star in each of those constellations. It's the bright one in each constellation. And that star does not always fit into the nakshatra boundary. You can, depending on the einamsha you use, you can get some of the stars to fit into the nakshatra boundary, but you can never get all of them to fit into the nakshatra boundary. Because again, that star, that significant star in the nakshatra, doesn't define the nakshatra. Mm-hmm. The nakshatra is defined because it's the 9th one, because it's the 10th one, because it's the 11th one. That's what gives it its power.
It's a number.
The star doesn't give it any power.
Right.
The star could disappear, and it would still be the same nakshatra.
Because it's the division of space, right?
It's the division of space as calculated, in my opinion, from the galactic center.
Right.
All the power of our galaxy and solar system is flowing out of the galactic center, the creative source of our galactic center. And our galactic center, people don't understand how it works. It's a giant black hole. And this black hole sucks matter in from the north and south. It sucks dark matter in from north and south with so much velocity that when that matter comes into the galactic center, it comes in with so much velocity, it gets thrown out sideways and creates the Milky Way galaxy, which is a flat galaxy. Mm-hmm. So it's getting sucked in and pushed out. Everything is coming from that powerful force, of this huge gravitational force that sucks things in so powerfully, they get thrown out. And they'll get thrown out for a half a day of Brahma. And after that, they'll get sucked back in for a half a day. And that will be 1 day of Brahma, after which the whole universe will sleep, according to Hindu thought. And this is a process of, billions of years, a day of Brahma. So, we're
going back.
Go ahead, yeah. So those nakshatras don't fit where they should. Nakshatras have nothing to do with the stars. Mm-hmm. They don't get their energy from the stars. The star, the nakshatra, that has the same name as the nakshatra, doesn't always fit into the nakshatra. It's a reference point.
Right.
And a good astrologer would know that, that star is sort of after that nakshatra. So this little bit of space, if the moon's there, I know it's in that nakshatra.
Exactly.
But once it actually gets to that star, I actually know it's in the next nakshatra, mm-hmm. by knowing where those stars really are.
Well, quick question. Sorry to take a little side here. With these talks that we're doing, one of the reasons I wanted to get you on the channel to speak about these things is because I think these are important points that a lot of people don't necessarily think about. However, I remember when I first started thinking about it, and I had been mainly doing sidereal astrology, mainly just looking at the nakshatras the same way everyone else did, it was a bit of a crisis for me. And I don't know how I persevered and got through it. So I'm curious for you, when you started thinking about these things and seeing them differently, I guess my question is, when we're talking to people like this, rather than just coming in and saying, everything you've been doing is dumb, because it can seem that way at times. Sure. And I totally get that. But what is a way to say, to explore these things, and how can they test them for themselves rather than fall into that trap of the kind of crisis that one might have to go through? Or do you think that's just natural, that you have to go through that kind of crisis?
See, the thing is, as humans, any change is going to bring about a crisis somehow. So what I would say is, if you have a good house, you'll enjoy a good 8th house, you'll enjoy the ride. Okay? But if you don't have a good 8th house, this is going to be really painful for you.
Right.
And the 8th house is the house of the occult. It's the house of always being willing to acknowledge your weaknesses. The 8th house is the house of your weaknesses. A good 8th house makes a person be able to be willing to acknowledge where they're weak, to break past where they're weak, and find a strength in being weak. It's weakness that destroys arrogance, and it's weakness that destroys the idea that we're right. The 8th house says, you're never right. You're only less wrong.
Right.
And so we have to look at it. It's not that you were wrong. It's that now you can be more right or less wrong, Right. And whatever you were doing that was more wrong that way you might be doing tomorrow was that whatever you're doing then was less wrong than before. So it's always just about getting better, acknowledging that we're always going to be weak. We're always going to fall short of perfection, but that's okay. Right. We're always going to use wrong calculations. I don't think my calculations are right. I just think my calculations are less wrong than they were 20 years ago.
Right.
But I won't be alive to see the advances in astronomy we need to perfect my calculation. So I have to satisfy myself with being less wrong than yesterday.
Right.
And I know for me, when I first started with astrology, I started with Ramon's Ayanamsha simply because I was using a lot of Ramon books. And I just started, but I was meditating 25 hours a week, and I cranked out a lot of really amazing predictions. It was all intuition. But when I studied statistically, and I test things, and I go, okay, why did this happen? It wasn't working as good as my predictions done with my intuition. I'd say, no, this logically doesn't make sense. So then I gravitated and I tried Chakras Ayanamsha a little bit. Okay. Then I got into really studying K.N. Rao. And K.N. Rao really used Lahiri. So then I started working with Lahiri a lot. And again, with all those Ayanamshas, I made a lot of really amazing predictions. And I can't say I made more great predictions with one of those than the other. But when I'd research things, past events, and statistically try things, I found all those Ayanamshas lacking. And so, but I was making great predictions with them, so I wouldn't ever say I made any more wrong predictions when I used Lahiri than any other Ayanamsha.
Right.
But I can certainly say when I statistically was testing things, I didn't have good results with Lahiri. And I didn't have good results with sidereal zodiac. When I statistically tested over a 2-year period every technique I'd ever learned, I did not find sidereal signs to win any statistical battles. Tropical won every single one with every single technique.
Right.
But that doesn't mean I made wrong predictions when I used the sidereal zodiac. I made more amazing predictions. Why? Because back then I was mostly doing readings. Nowadays, I'm spending too much time in research, so I don't spend as many time doing readings, so I don't get to make as many predictions, because I'm not handling as many charts,
Right.
The more charts you handle, the more amazing predictions you'll make.
Right. Exactly. Yeah. The odds are in your favor.
What I say is, I made amazing predictions and I made wrong predictions with all kinds of Ayanamshas. But when it comes to statistically testing things and programming things, that's when, those are the things that encouraged me to change. Just as an intuitive reader, as a reader who can intuit things, which any reader can or they can't survive, it's not really that important what you're doing, because your intuition gets you through at the end of the day. But if we really want to have a scientific astrology, that people with less intuition can do just as well, we need to get our scientifics, our calculations accurate. If we want to ever be able to program a computer to predict something, it has to be scientifically perfect. We can't have a wrong calculation. An intuitive reader, someone like K.N. Rao, these intuitive readers, you can just give them a false horoscope half the time and they'll be able to predict it. When I used to have students going through Ainamsha crises, oh, what should I use? I would grab their chart. I'd say, pick a number between 0 and 360. And whatever number they chose, 97, say, I would put that in as the Ainamsha. I'd use that as the custom Ainamsha. I'd create this utterly random chart. And I'd look at their chart and say, well, you were running the Sun Dasha in the 6th house as 7th Lord with the 6th Lord. So in Sun Mercury or whatever, I don't even remember, that's when you got divorced, right? And they're like, yeah, that's why I got divorced. And I'm like, yeah. And I just saw that with the 97-degree Ainamsha.
Right.
Okay. So wow. You can do some good work because we have intuition. Mm-hmm. But my goal is not to sit around and do readings all day long. I don't do that. If my goal is sitting down and do readings all day long, I wouldn't even do astrology. I would do cards, because cards is fast and easy. And I can do 10 times more readings with cards than I can with astrology.
We'll save that. We are going to talk about that. We're just not there yet.
That was my goal. But my goal is to perfect astrology scientifically.
Right.
To see what really scientifically works. Well, and for that, it's research.
I think it's also important to remember that people who are doing any kind of astrology, if they are trying to take it from a scientific standpoint, even if they are listening to the information that's being shared, even if they listen to it and they decide that it is not accurate based on how they think or their logic or whatever, it's good because at least they now have some kind of insight, or they have at least thought it through. Even if they haven't came to the same conclusion, they're going to be maybe a little bit more informed, which I think is probably one of the most important things. So
totally. You know. And the most important thing for everyone depends on what their goal is. Mm. If a person's goal is to help their clients, and they're finding themselves able to help their clients and answer their clients' questions accurately, I don't care what Ainamsha they use.
Right.
And I've seen astrologers do it with all Ainamshas and all calculations for Nakshatras. I've seen them do it with Nakshatras. I've seen them doing it without using any Nakshatras, right?
Right.
If they're succeeding in their goal, they're using astrology in a good way. Mm-hmm. So that's why I don't go around trying to force people to use this Ainamsha or this Ainamsha.
Right.
Or whatever. But we're supposed to be talking about Nakshatras.
Yeah. So back to Nakshatras. Let's rein it in there a little bit. And so when we're thinking about Nakshatras, you know, when you can use different kinds of calculations for Nakshatras, correct? Mm-hmm. Which can also make the seeming size of the Nakshatra different? Well, there's a lot of different sub-schools of Nakshatras, okay? Okay. The standard school says we're going to use Lahiri Ainamsha. Every Nakshatra is 20 or 13 degrees and 20 minutes, and they're all the same size. Mm-hmm. But there are some people in India who will calculate the Nakshatras out to different lengths. The reason they do that, because in Vimshatri, Ketu Dasha is 7 years, right? Mm-hmm. Sun Dasha is 6 years. Venus Dasha is 20 years. But the Nakshatras are the same length. So why does one Dasha get more years than another? So what some people have done in India, they will take the Nakshatra, and Ketu's Nakshatras are 7 degrees. Venus Nakshatras are 20 degrees. The Sun's Nakshatras are 6 degrees. You know, Jupiter's Nakshatras are 16 degrees. Does that add up, though, to 360?
Yeah, it adds up to 360, yeah.
Oh, nice.
The Nakshatra is 120 years, right?
Right, okay.
There's 3 of each Nakshatra.
Right, I see. Mm-hmm.
So it adds up. So they'll do this, and they'll calculate the Nakshatras this way. And honestly, that's really logical to me.
Yeah.
That's like more logical than having Nakshatras that are equal and giving different years, right? Right. Which really seems illogical to me. So I think that's something worth investigating for people. Right. Some people in India, there's 2 schools in India that actually use tropical nakshatras. The reason they do this is because if you grab Varaha Mihira's text, and Varaha Mihira was considered the greatest astrologer who wasn't a rishi, okay? And some people consider him to be an incarnation of the sun. And he lived around 500, 550 AD. So he wrote Brihad Jataka. Mm-hmm. And in Brihad Jataka, he says, Ashwini starts at Aries. So the nakshatras and the signs line up, okay? Right. Mm-hmm. All right, everyone practices that who's a sidereal astrologer, right? Mm-hmm. But then he also wrote a book called Panchasiddhantika, which was an astronomy book on how to calculate the astronomical calculations. And in that book, he says, Aries sign, the Navamsha of Mars, the Trimsamsha of Mars, the Drekana of Mars, all start at the vernal equinox. So he's basically saying the zodiac starts at the vernal equinox. It's a tropical zodiac.
Right.
That's what he says. But in his other book, he said the nakshatras line up with the zodiac. So effectively, he's saying nakshatras are tropical.
Interesting. Okay.
And so a lot of people read that and say, okay, I'm going to calculate my signs tropical and my nakshatras tropical too.
Right.
And there's two schools who do that. There's one sort of crazy person out there who promotes that. But there's another person who's a really intelligent, grounded person who's written extensively, written a few books on this, who's done all kinds of research in astrology, who's a real serious scholar, whereas the other guy sort of just this crazy guy, doesn't do any studying, just kind of comes up with things and thinks that he came from God, right? But the other guy, you know, he's put his time in, he's studied and he's thought things through and he's tested things and he's read charts and he comes from a tradition of astrologers actually. And they use tropical nakshatras.
So does he also use the different length of the nakshatra?
Yes.
So he just keeps it the same 1320?
Yes, he does.
Okay.
But I don't remember, it's been a long time since I've been in touch with anyone who used unequal nakshatras. Somebody contacted me and told me about his whole system and everyone using it, but this was like 7-8 years ago. I don't even recall his name.
Okay.
And so there was a lot, like I said, there's a lot of ambiguity about nakshatras. Well, how should we really do them? What should we really do? And I'm constantly testing nakshatra ideas. Every time I learn new technique, every time I try something new, I'm constantly trying new nakshatra things. And every once in a while I go, oh, this almost works better. But I've never tried anything that I thought really worked better enough to turn the tables and freak a lot of people out. It always comes back to, you know, at the end of the day, I'm still finding what I'm using now to work as good as anything else and better than most things.
So have you tried the tropical nakshatras?
I've tried tropical nakshatras, and I've tried tropical nakshatras in different ways.
Okay.
I've tried tropical nakshatras equally, and I've tried them unequally.
Okay.
I've tried sidereal nakshatras equally, and I've tried sidereal nakshatras unequally.
Right.
And there's been times where I looked at a chart with one of those options and I was like, holy man, this makes sense fine. This chart's working better than ever.
Yes.
Had a lot of cases like that. But not every case.
Right.
Then I'll go to another case and I'll go, but with this case, it's not better.
Well, I mean, could we use the classic excuse that the birth time is wrong?
We could use the classic excuse, but if we think the birth time's wrong, we shouldn't be using that chart to define something critical, right?
That's right. That's right.
So, but I've tested all those things. I've tested tropical nakshatras. There's a lot of theory that I don't want to get into now, but there's a lot of reason that we could say nakshatras could be tropical. There's a lot of logic to it. As a result, I've tried it.
Right.
But I didn't have better results in every chart. Now, why is that? But I had better results in some charts.
Right.
You know, I had better results in some charts, but I didn't have better results in all charts. So that could be because of a weakness in the dashas, perhaps. There's a lot of things about Lahiri that we have, not about Lahiri, about Vimshatri Dasha. The most important thing about nakshatras is the use in Vimshatri Dasha. There's a lot to be learned about Vimshatri Dasha. There's a lot of things that's being done wrong with Parashara astrology. Everyone likes to say, oh, we're doing it perfectly. Well, if you want to believe the bullshit, believe that. I'm the one telling you that I've studied it all, and I think we're still doing a lot of things wrong, me included. I'm not doing anything right. I'm only doing things less wrong than I used to. And in my opinion, less wrong than a lot of other astrologers. Right. That doesn't mean I'm right, okay? I have a long ways to go before I stand up and bare my chest and pound on it and say I'm right, okay?
You leave that to other people.
That'll be on Ryan's channel, not mine. So, you know, and So I constantly investigate things. When I learn something that helps me use Vimshatri Dasha better, what do? I try it with sidereal zodiac. I try it with tropical zodiac. I try it with sidereal nakshatras and tropical zodiac. I try it with sidereal nakshatra, tropical nakshatras and tropical zodiac. I try all the possibilities. I say, okay, now that I use Vimshatri a little more intelligently, can I find statistically a particular nakshatra calculation giving me better results across the board? And if the day that happens, I'm going to ruin everyone's day and say, actually, I'm going to calculate nakshatras differently. Right. Now, I haven't had one of those days. I did have a minor day where I was using a different year length for many years, from 2007 until 2015. And then at the end of 2015, I decided to change my nakshatra year length, or the dasha year length I was using, from nakshatra year to Sora year. And a lot of people got a little confused, but because I learned to use Vimshatri a little better, and when I went back and tested things, I had better results when I used a different year length, so I did. And a lot of people probably, were bummed at me and, cursed me a little bit, but that's all good. It's statistically tested, so I shifted. But a lot of the other things I've tested, I haven't gotten the results that would make me think a change is necessary. But I keep pushing because I think we have a lot to learn with respect to Vimshatri, to using nakshatras in the chart, and to calculating nakshatras perhaps. But maybe not. Maybe it'll always come back that the calculations I'm using now statistically test out better as I learn more other things. I don't know, but I always try everything again when I learn something new.
Well, considering that, we did talk about the Ainamshas in the previous talk that we had. Can you take some time to speak to when people are choosing in Kala, either the Dhruva equatorial longitude for Nakshatra, the ecliptic, or neither? So, when people are typically doing standard sidereal Vedic astrology, are they using the neither option?
I would recommend the neither, because when they use the neither, however you want to say it, option, when people use sidereal rashis, they want their nakshatras to line up with their rashis, right?
Right.
And that's only going to happen if you pick neither.
Okay. And they're all
if you pick one of those other options, your Ainamsha, even if you're using a sidereal zodiac, your nakshatra positions can change by up to 4 degrees.
Right.
And you're not going to want that. Okay. So in that case, use neither. Only play with those other nakshatra options if you're using tropical zodiac is my recommendation.
Well, what is I know we discussed this briefly with the Ainamsha video previously, but when we're using Dhruva equatorial longitude, what exactly is that doing to the position and maybe even the size of the nakshatras in the chart? First of all, does it do anything to the size of the nakshatra?
No, size of nakshatra stays the same.
Stays the same.
The difference is, if you use the Dhruva, you're basically measuring the nakshatras along the equatorial plane.
Okay, great.
That means there'll be 13 degrees and 20 minutes along the equatorial plane, but not 13 degrees and 20 minutes when that is transposed to the ecliptic plane.
Right. So
and that's where the difference is.
Can you take us just a little further down that rabbit hole? Just briefly.
Okay. Here's the ecliptic. Okay. Next time I do this, I'm wearing a short sleeve shirt. I'm going to write like Aries, Taurus, Gemini. And then it'll be better. So here's our ecliptic.
Yeah.
Here's our planet.
Yes.
Okay. Now, my zodiac, I'm going to measure this way.
Yes.
Perpendicular. But my nakshatra, I'm going to measure relevant to the Earth's axis because the stars revolve around the Earth's axis. So I'm going to measure my nakshatra this way. So if I measure, say the planet's on the ecliptic here, I'm going to measure that position down to here, to the, not here, it's hard to say. I'm going to measure it to the equator.
Right.
Okay, to where that planet intersects the equator, not where it intersects the ecliptic.
Right.
So a planet here can intersect the ecliptic here, but the equator up here. So it could be in different nakshatras depending what system you use.
Right.
And then the nakshatra is 13 degrees along the ecliptic. The nakshatra is 13 degrees between my two fingers, 13 degrees 20 minutes on the equator,
Right.
or in accordance with the stellar circle. Because the stellar circle revolves around the equator. The stellar circle does not revolve around that. The galactic center does not revolve around the ecliptic. It revolves around the equator. Because it only appears to revolve because the Earth is turning on its axis. So this is 13 degrees and 20 minutes.
Right.
I get this to here and this to here. Now, this is longer than 13 degrees, right?
Right. That's what I was trying to get at. Yes.
And that's the point. So along the ecliptic, at some points it'll be more than 1320, and other points it'll be less than 1320.
But it's not because the nakshatra itself is larger. It's just the way it's hitting the ecliptic.
And we're measuring the nakshatra along against the equatorial plane.
Right.
And to me, it makes sense to measure nakshatras along the equatorial plane, because the nakshatras have to do with the moon. And the moon is a satellite of the Earth, and the moon revolves around the Earth. And the moon, you know, the nakshatras are, we even have something called the nakshatra day, which is the time it takes for the Earth to revolve on its axis once. And the old books tell us that the nakshatras revolve around the Earth in an east-west motion, which is the motion of the equator, not the motion of the ecliptic. So I think we should define nakshatras along the equatorial plane. That makes sense because the nakshatras are like all the planets are a deva, but the most important planet is Earth. By far the most important planet. One of the problems we have on Earth is we don't treat Earth with the respect that a deity is due. We treat Earth like a lump of clay. Unfortunately, we do that in astrology as well. You know, Earth is the most important planet in astrology. It's the center, you know?
Right.
But what do we treat it like shit in astrology. We don't give it a deity, but we do. The nakshatra deities, those are the deities of Earth. Earth is so important in astrology that it gets 27 devas, where the other planets only get 1 or 2.
Yeah, but people are going to say, you know, that these devas, that they're not supposed to be associated with the Earth. I mean, I realize that the names of them and their qualities and things should indicate that they are related to the Earth, right?
Yeah.
But there's the other school that would say that we're just kind of ignoring that. I mean, you follow what I'm asking there? Like,
sure. People want to look to the stars.
Right. That's what yes.
Yeah. You know, but really the source of astrology is Earth. You know, everything is calculated from the point of view of the Earth, right?
Yeah. We
don't calculate anything from the point of view of the sun or any other star. It's all calculated from the point of view of the Earth. The Earth is the center. It's the part of our solar system. It's the key planet.
But then again, wouldn't that bring us back to the idea of tropical nakshatras?
Well, you can do it either way. You can say, it brings you back to that idea, you bet, that maybe nakshatras should be tropical.
Right.
But you also could say, well, how the Earth is being embraced by the galactic center becomes important. So you could also claim that.
Right.
But yeah, if we didn't have a galactic center, there'd be no room, in my opinion, for nakshatras to be sidereal. If we didn't have a galactic center to define nakshatras with, I would say nakshatras would have to be tropical.
Right.
Because it makes no sense to define a nakshatra to a star. A lot of people will not believe that because it's such a tradition to look at the nakshatras in the context of the stars. But the nakshatras are more than the stars. They're segments. All astrology is about segments of circles. For instance, we've got the 12 houses, right? The 12 houses is just a segment of the circle of what's called the the circle of the observer, let's call it. So you're born and you look up and you go, wow, and that's the circle of houses. It's a circle that's defined by the intersection of the eastern horizon, the southernmost point, and the northernmost point, and the western horizon. It's defined by planes. But there's not like there's anything there in those 12-degree segments. It's not like there's, you know, a house in the segment where the fourth house is, you know?
Right, right.
It's not like there's, it's not like there's a teacher floating in the sky where the ninth house is, right?
Right.
It's the ninth segment of a circle. Everything on astrology is about taking a circle and segmenting it. And things gain the power they have because they're the 7th, the 8th, the 9th, the 10th part of the segment of the circle, right? Same for nakshatras. They get the power they have because they're the 1st, 2nd, 3rd, 27th portion of a cycle. God does it in steps.
How does this...
and takes another step, and each step is a segment in the circle.
But how does this relate to, for example, like in Satya Jataka with the Torah table that's in there, right?
Okay.
So when we think about that, it's just we've gotten divided up into 3 parts, 1 through 9.
Yes.
Okay. So when we think... Yeah, go ahead.
Okay. Because that's the occult division that creates the powers of the nakshatras. See, you can take... everything is based on occult divisions. You can take any circle and divide it into any occult division and do a reading on it. If you understand what the occult division means. So there's this one scholar from India who did the best Jaimini translation in the 50s. And you've read that introduction now. I give that to you.
Yeah.
He talks about the zodiac starting out as 4 signs, an occult division of 4. Well, someone who understands the occult division of 4 could read your chart based on 4 signs. Okay, so different systems of astrology, they all use the same circles, but they divided it into different segments.
Right.
But they divided it into segments that they understood based on their occult knowledge. The Mayans defined everything into divisions of 5s. They were big into 5s and 20-year cycles, but they understood the symbolism of those occult divisions and were supposedly good astrologers.
Right.
But that's largely been lost, okay? Now, one school of astrology wanted to work with a division of 3s and 9s, nakshatras. Another system of astrology wanted to work with divisions of 12s, the houses and the signs. The truth is, we could take the houses and divide and create 27 houses if we wanted to. If we approach those houses from the occult divisions of 9 and 3.
Right.
And it would just be a different system. And I'm sure at some time those things have existed.
Right.
All these things have existed. Now there's a reason there's not everything in existence. We're not going to have 7s and 8s and so on.
It's true, because there's only 6, really.
It's because of how the occult works.
Right.
And the way the occult works is that the 1 becomes the 2 becomes the 3, and the 3 becomes all things.
Right.
That should become every astrologer's, card readers, any occultist can't. When they try to understand something, they should think in those terms. The fact that we have 9 planets is based on that sutra. The fact that we have 27 nakshatras is based on that sutra. Well, how's that? It is. The fact that we have 12 signs is based on that. The fact we have 12 houses. Everything's based on this idea that the 1 becomes a 2, 2 becomes a 3, and the 3 becomes all things. The 3 gunas is based on that idea. Spirit and nature, Radha, Govinda, all based on this occult idea. This is the root idea of all occult sciences. And with that, we can create different occult divisions. And as long as we understand the occult division, we could do it. The Mayans supposedly had an occult division of 13 in their circle. And from what I've gathered, they actually based it on where the planet was from the sun. So they would start the cycle when the planet conjuncted the sun. And as the planet went opposite the sun and returned, they would take that cycle. You know how we have the moon? The full and new moon cycle, right? They didn't have a zodiac like we have based on some star or based on a tropical point or something. They basically based the cycles of the planets on the sun. Isn't that brilliant?
It is, yeah.
It's like brilliant. We should be doing that too. We shouldn't do it and throw out our zodiac.
Right.
but we should have it as part of astrology because it's part of what's happening up in the sky. Mm-hmm. If we can understand that part, we'll become better astrologers. And just because, it wasn't preserved in India, doesn't mean we should use it. Astrology is the study of the heavens' impact upon Earth. Mm-hmm. And different parts of the world have embraced different aspects of that and maintained it, while other parts have lost it and other parts have distorted it. Okay? And it's all been distorted as a result of the Dark Ages in every culture. And we're trying to pick up the pieces. Right. So with the Mayans, they did a 13-fold division of that circle, though. Why 13? Well, there's a lot of reasons for 13. 13 lunar months kind of fit better than 12 lunar months. Mm-hmm. And you can see how this idea of a cycle from the sun starts with the very obvious cycle of the sun-moon, right? If you get a really good telescope and look at Venus, it's not always round.
Right.
You can look at Venus, it'll look like a half moon because of where it is from the sun. You're like, wait a minute, it's not round. Because it's getting light from the sun the same way the moon does. It goes through its cycle of full Venus and dark Venus. Dark Venus is when Venus is combust behind the sun, right?
Right.
Then we get full Venus. And all the planets have their dark and their full. And we're not even using that in astrology. We should be. So the Mayans did that into a 13-fold cycle. And there is some people trying to bring out the Mayan. There's a good Vedic astrologer who's diving into the Mayans recently and has gone totally Mayan as far as I know. You must know him. He wrote a book on Nakshatras 20 years ago. Kenneth Johnson. No. Okay,
I don't know Kenneth. But
I think it's Kenneth Johnson. It's been so long.
Okay.
I might have the mistake wrong. But he has a decent book on Nakshatras, and he also is getting into the Mayan stuff. So you can divide, the point I'm trying to make, you divide any circle into any occult division, and if you understand the occult division symbology, use that cycle.
Right.
And different cultures have used different ones. And so the Chinese used 28 nakshatras, 28 stars, a 4 and a 7. That's also part of the occult division. If you read my Graha Sutras, I get into some of this occult division and I explain how 9 planets come out of it, and so on. And in the card system, I explain how we end up with 13 cards and so on. So it's all related to this,
right?
To these ideas.
Well, that's a lot to think about.
That's a lot to think about. Yeah. So the occult, we need to look at the occult and astrology and any of these systems as works in progress. That's the most important thing for people to understand. What's always sad is when we're living in an uprising scientific age, which is the age we're living in now, where all sciences are emerging sciences. Astrology was not preserved perfectly in the books from 500 AD that we have. You know, Varahamihira was not aware of the precession of the equinoxes. So we can't treat him like he was God. We don't have the true writings of Parashara. We don't have any true words that are 100% his. We have Dark Age interpretations of his words, preserved by astrologers who were using calculations that were up to 4 degrees off. So based on those wrong calculations, what things did they decide worked and what things wouldn't work for them? A lot of things weren't going to work for them. That's why when you see old charts, you never see Vargas. Even in India to this day, my relatives will bring me charts when they were born in the 50s or 40s. And, you know, they went to the astrologer at birth, had their horoscope read. What did they have? Rashi, Chandra Lagna. Sometimes, and hardly ever, Navamsha. Mostly Rashi, Chandra Lagna.
So
there's not even a history of using Vargas. Why? Because when they tried to use the Vargas, they wouldn't work because their planets were off by up to 3 or 4 degrees.
So you wouldn't just say that the astrologers were so brilliant that when they saw a planet at 3 degrees of Aries, they would know every Varga that planet was in?
Sadly, no.
Okay.
And they lived in primitive cultures where you hardly needed to know astrology to predict what the woodcutter son was going to do for a job. He was going to be a woodcutter, right?
Right.
And how was he going to marry? He was going to marry the daughter of the guy who collected the wood sticks for the fireplace.
Right.
how perfect does your astrology technique have to be living in such a primitive society, right?
Right.
Now we live in this crazy world where every year there's twice as many jobs developed as are lost.
Right.
We have our work cut out for us, you know?
Yeah.
And there's no caste boundaries. The minute you have a caste boundary, you've made the job 75% easier.
Right.
We don't have that anymore.
Right.
So it's hard work to be an astrologer now. As a result, it's an emerging science. It's a mistake to think that the wrong things done that worked in the Dark Ages are accurate enough to work now. They don't work now. We can do better astrology because we've got computers. We can do better scientific astrology. The danger we're in, though, is too much information, too fast,
Right.
and getting overly into the intellectual and lose the intuitive grasp. So these old astrologers, they might have one book. They maybe met one person to study astrology from. They were going to learn a very limited amount, but they used that limited amount with the full capacity of their brain and intuition to do great predictions.
Mm-hmm.
So that's what we need to keep from the old school, is to find what is it that I love? What's drawing me? I'm going to use that. Forget the rest.
Right.
If I read your chart this year, I'm going to be using a completely different something than 5 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
I'm going to use what's stirring me up the most with astrology right now.
Right.
And that's always different.
Mm-hmm.
But I don't try to use all of it at once. If I do, I'm going to blow a gasket.
Right.
And my intuition is going to be so far gone, I'll look at the chart and it'll look like a blank piece of paper with mud on it.
Mm-hmm.
You can't do it. So remember, what do you need to learn? People ask me, they say, oh, what do I need to study first? I'm like, study what you're drawn towards and use that. That's what your brain wants to use. That's what you're going to be able to use best. You can't learn everything well.
Right.
So these guys had the advantage that they only had so much they could learn. And so they had no choice but to use it at a high level. Using a hammer to fix a car at a skilled level is better than having a full auto shop with all the latest pneumatic tools without really knowing how any of those tools work.
Right.
Okay?
Right. Well, you bring up another good point there, and then we'll go ahead and conclude on this topic. The idea that in our previous video we discussed Ayanamshas and how people can have different dashas by going to different astrologers and so on. But even with this kind of situation that you're describing, an astrologer, you could go to one astrologer, and because that astrologer is nuts about nakshatras, then they're going to do a certain kind of work with you. And then you're going to go to another astrologer who's going to say something, and maybe they're nuts about Lajatati Avashtas or just looking at Shadbala. And again, the point I'm trying to get at is when you go to different astrologers, they're going to be coming at it with a different tool set, and that's okay.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's really important. Some people are going to use the Japanese tool set, other ones American made, some will use metric crunches.
Right.
It's okay.
Yeah.
You came to them to get a reading. Your job is sit down and shut up. The most offensive thing somebody can do, I've had people go to sidereal astrologers and say, Ernst is too busy to read my chart, but I want you to read my chart with his calculations.
Right. Yeah.
No, don't do that. He'll give you a horrible reading.
Right.
The astrologer you go to is going to read your chart right because of his broad knowledge and intuition.
Mm-hmm.
He's not plugging your data into a computer that's going to spit out a report that he's reading to you. He has to feel secure and confident and have reliability with his method. Mm-hmm. If you want him to use a different method or a different calculation, he loses that, and then he can't read his chart. The number one thing for an astrologer to do a chart well is confidence in what he's working with.
Yeah.
And he has that confidence because it's worked for him. So whatever he's using, go do it. Don't go to an astrologer because he uses a particular system. Mm-hmm. Go to an astrologer because somebody told you they had an amazing reading with that astrologer. Don't go to an astrologer because you saw him on YouTube and he looked good, spoke good, or said something new. Mm-hmm. Go to an astrologer because someone you know went to that astrologer and had an amazing reading. That's the only way you should pick your astrologer. And picking an astrologer in any other way is not going to guarantee you as good of a reading, okay?
Right.
So see, you and your friends and the people you associate with, have a harmony between you. There's a connection. The astrologer your friend got a good reading from is plugged into that same vein. Otherwise, they couldn't have given your friend a good reading. Mm-hmm. So keep plugged into that vein of life that's working for you in the form of your friends. Don't jump out of that vein and try to jump into another vein of life that may be contrary to your whole entire flow. Right. You get an astrologer who looks at their chart and goes, I don't even know what to say.
Right.
Go to the astrologer that your friends say, wow.
Good. Excellent.
And I noticed that when I used to, before the internet, which is the worst thing that's happened to us astrologers, you know, people came because, you know, they came because their friends told them about me. It was all word of mouth. I did one advertisement my first week. I said, doing all readings on donation for the next 6 weeks. I just moved to a town. And I put a little billboard up. So people came and it worked. And after that, it was all word of mouth from those first 6 weeks of people.
Right.
All the readings were fantastic. Never felt like I had a bad reading. Mm-hmm. There was times I blundered predictions, but I would blunder the prediction that would make the person do what made them happy in life. And they would actually thank me that I blundered. They would call me 2 years later and say, I'm so glad you blundered that prediction. But since you made it, I lived my life in a way that's made my life better than ever. So even the blunders were like helping the people. Then when the internet came, I started getting inundated by people who wanted me to help them, but they weren't the people who I was the right person to help them. So I had to start defining and learning how I was the right person or not, and whether I should push the delete key or write them back. Mm-hmm. And 99% of them were delete keys. I'm just not the best astrologer for them, and I have to find out my way of knowing that.
I'm still waiting on my reading from you.
I'm not the right astrologer for you. God. Get out of here.
Yeah.
Anyway.
Well.
So anyway, if people who are looking for astrologers, be led to one. Mm-hmm. The astrologer you're led through your associates will usually be the best one in most cases. Now that rule applies mostly. There's always breaks to the rule.
Right.
But you know, and it's the best astrology readings are the ones that come into your life. Mm-hmm. A lot of people understand that an astrology reading is not something you can go and buy. It's something you earn. Like Swami Rama, when he was walking through the Himalayas, he walks and all of a sudden there's this rock and there's a scroll on the rock. He's like, huh? And he reads the scroll. He goes, this is a horoscope for you. You'll be walking by this path at this age,
That's
this
good.
many days, and this is your horoscope. Wow. Okay, you're going to do this, this, and this. Beautiful reading, okay?
Right.
That's how good readings work. My first astrology reading, I was living with a friend. I was my last week in Milwaukee. I'd moved out of my apartment, so I was couching on a friend's couch for a week. And the last day I was there, he goes, you know, I know this great astrologer. I think you would love having her read your chart. So we called her up. She read my chart. And for an hour and a half, then he kicked me off the phone because of long distance charges. And the next day I was driving home, and it was a 1,500-mile drive, and she was right in the middle of it. So she invited me to come for a visit. Mm-hmm. I drove to her house, stopped over, spent the night. She taught me how to calculate charts and gave me an introductory course of hers. And the first reading was my most accurate one. Mm-hmm. I've never had an astrologer. She was a Western astrologer. I've never had an astrologer I've ever shopped for or gone for who gave me a reading that was worth my time. Mm-hmm. Seriously, it wasn't worth the 90 minutes to sit there. Right. It wasn't worth the money I spent. I remember spending $108 for an ACFA astrologer at an ACFA conference once. It was a whole utter waste of my time and my money, you know? And this is an Indian who came from India, you know, and did an ACFA lecture. Mm-hmm. But that first reading that was given to me by life, where it just worked out, that's your first reading. You can't shop for clues to your destiny. People try and they try. They go, I went to 10 astrologers. I asked them all the same questions, and they were all wrong. Yeah. Right. But when you're on a train one day, and the guy looks at you and says, you know, let me read your chart. We got 2 hours. That's the reading that's going to be accurate for you.
Right.
So let the astrology reading fall and come into your life. and then study astrology on your own. And then you're going to have the best relationship with astrology. Thinking you can force destiny to give you the answers by shopping for astrologers, it doesn't work that way. Astrology is a sacred thing that's given by life at the right time when you're meant to.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the ways you're meant to is your friend will say, hey, I met this great person. You should go meet them. Mm-hmm. Your life will work to your friends. Sadly, life does not work very well through YouTube.
Right.
Because YouTube is not life. YouTube is, is megabytes.
Right.
Life is living entities, people. Come to learn on YouTube and the internet. It's good for learning. And that's really about all it's good for.
Yeah.
And entertainment.
Right. Exactly.
Which is why me and Ryan are here.
Yeah. Well, we still have to do the lecture on Captain Kirk's chart.
Yes, we've rectified Captain Kirk's chart, finally. Yes. So we'll talk about that sometime.
Yeah, that'll be early next year, I believe. We'll get into that. But
yes.
Speaking of destiny and truth, maybe we should move from destiny to truth and move on to our next segment. What do you think?
Let's do it.
All right.